Watch this. No way!
Hello and welcome back to the Kuchar Golf Podcast. I am Tom Mills and today I'm joined by Cal Wing.
Hello.
And Bruce Fitzpatrick.
Hello.
Don't forget, as always, you can get in touch with us at Kuchar Golf on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter. Today, we've got a superb guest lined up for you guys. He is a renowned sports psychologist, voted as one of the top sports psychologists in the world by Golf Digest and Sport Psychologist of the Year by Golf Channel. He's the author of Fearless Golf and world-renowned performance coach. He's worked with golf champions including Tiger Woods, Jordan Spieth, Justin Rose, Matt Kuchar. The list goes on and on. During his career, he's helped players win more than 50 PGA Tour events and has been featured in the New York Times, Financial Times and Golf Magazine. He's also the founder of fearlessgolf.com. We're really lucky to have him on the pod, and it's Dr. Gio Valiante. Gio, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here, guys. Thank you.
Oh,
Thank
it's
you.
our pleasure, truly. How are you keeping during this testing period?
Yeah, I think we're doing better than most. We're in Florida. We've got nice weather. I have 3 kids, which keep us busy. I've got a fantastic wife who keeps things fun around here. So we're doing okay. You know, when you're spend a life traveling the way that I have, you know, on the PGA Tour and with my various clients, it's actually nice to be, you know, when the world imposes and tells you you cannot travel. So we're really enjoying our days around here.
Yeah, I bet it's great to spend a bit of time with the family if you're always traveling all the time.
It's really nice, and I'm getting to know my kids in ways that I didn't. You know, when you saturate yourself in time with kids, you get to know things about them that I'd missed. And I've got this remarkable 4-year-old daughter who every morning I get woken up to a song. She sings every morning, comes home and starts singing to me to wake me up. It's really cute.
As long as it's after 6 a.m., right?
Sometimes it's after 6 and sometimes it's before.
Well, it's going to be testing for everyone. With the players that you have in your stable, how are they coping with the lockdown? Are they needing a lot of attention during this time, or are you pretty much hands off?
No, it's interesting. During the active season, it's hard to get a lot of time with them because the nature of the PGA Tour schedule and the routines and the structures are such that time is a real premium. I mean, you assume tournament finishes on Sunday. You get a flight out, you know, Mondays, or, you know, call it Monday's a travel day. By the time Tuesday comes in and it's a family day and you're getting all your stuff figured out, and then Tuesday you got a tee in the ground for practice, Wednesday practice, Thursday tournament. And so time is really condensed. So we're actually doing a lot of work right now and staying really busy.
With regard to the lockdown itself, the lockdown we have over here, just before we dive into the proper stuff of this, how would you suggest some of our listeners keep sane in this period of
Well, there's
torture?
2 things. Yeah, and I if you want to go look for me on LinkedIn or Facebook, I've been posting I think some helpful things pretty much daily. I've never been much of a social media person, but in the last couple of months I've been more active, and largely because people have been requesting for more and more of it. But there's 2 things that you should all be hopeful about. Number one is the design of the brain. The brain is designed. A French psychologist named Jean Piaget talks about the process of equilibration, that the brain adapts and adjusts to ever-changing environments, right? And so think of it this way: when we're hot, we sweat. When we're cold, we get goosebumps. In other words, the brain and the body always find an equilibrium. It's just the nature of it. And, you know, we're all in a new normal. Now, what you don't want to do is anchor yourself to the past and be wistful and regret. And it's never helpful to live in the past. Like, there's a new normal. If you're just willing to sort of, you know, reinvent yourself and adapt and adjust, your brain is there to go along for the ride with you. So take the right attitude, you have to reinvent yourself. You have to adapt. You have to adjust. Don't get too nostalgic about the good old days, because that'll just make you sad, makes everybody sad. And the other thing about nostalgia is things weren't as good as we remember them anyway, right? So, you know, get present, let the process of equilibration, adaptation, and adjustment happen. And You know, there's really no reason that you can't find meaning and joy and bliss. And as you guys are doing right now, right? You know, you're making the best of what life gives you. Lemons, you make lemonade. And here you are doing a wonderful show and reaching out to people. Like you're an example of what people should be doing is find new things to do, immerse yourself in cool stuff,
Amen.
which is the point too. Like if you want to be happy, find something to do. In psychology, we talk about what are called flow states, which are the highest state of functioning. You know, it's when Kobe Bryant scored 81 points. It's when Tiger Woods shot 59 at Isleworth before winning the Masters in '97. It's Chad Campbell 61 at the Players Championship. These flow states are when the mind and body get aligned and we're our highest functioning state of being. But one of the things we know about flow is it happens when you're actively engaged in something. You know, people get lost in the process of cooking or gardening or a great conversation or reading a great book or doing an interview. Like it doesn't matter what you're doing. As long as you're doing something you enjoy, you have a chance to get into flow. So don't moan and groan about the things you don't get to do. Like, you know, find things that you do get to do and immerse yourself in them. And one of the characteristics of flow is that there's a paradox of time where time feels like it's slow, but when you look back, like, oh, that went by quickly, right? Time flies while you're having fun. And so, like I said, the two things I would say is don't anchor to the past, trust the process of adaptation in the brain, and get busy getting busy. You know, find stuff to do and do it.
Do those household chores and tasks that we've been putting off for years, and just keep busy. That's great. That's great advice, Gio. I guess going back to the beginning, am I right in thinking you started off with quite an academic focus in psychology? I know you talked about studying it at the University of Florida and then going over to Emory with a former professor to study it at a graduate level. What prompted you to sort of take the step into maybe a more practical approach of it and working with sports people and working with golfers in particular?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I did not take the step. This is one of those things where it happened to me, right? So I was, you know, a level one researcher, an academic researcher at Emory University. Fully intending to live an academic life as a professor and a researcher. What happened was my last year and a half of graduate school, I started studying what's called social cognitive theory. And I grew up, my dad, when I was growing up as a kid, my dad played golf a lot. I grew up playing golf just in high school. But as I was studying social cognitive theory, I started thinking, wow, all of this applies to golf, but nobody was making the connection. You know, there was some sports psychology out there, but it wasn't at the level of this social cognitive theory. So what I started doing is I do my regular work during the days, and then in the evenings I would write little thought pieces on golf. Just, you know, as I would watch golf or read biographies of Hogan, Snead, Nicholas, various others, Faldo's books, Greg Norman's books, and I would make the connection between the theory and what they were saying about their experience. So I wrote a thought piece. And it was called Mastery versus Ego in Golf. And I wrote it just for myself. And what I did is I was getting golf lessons from a local pro, and I gave him a copy of it because he said, because I was poor, I was in graduate school and he was poor. He said, I'll trade you golf lessons if you teach me what you're learning at Emory. I said, sure. And so I handed it to him, and lo and behold, he went and won the PGA section, the Georgia PGA section championship.
Oh, wow.
So he gave it to a friend of his, and his friend read it. And I started talking to his friend. His friend won a big tournament soon after that. So they photocopied it. This is in the days before email. And this is in Georgia, and somehow someone gave a copy of it to Davis Love III. And Davis Love III that year took the lead at the Masters, and he referenced my paper.
But that was a thrill.
On TV. Yeah, and I'm sitting there watching the Masters, and I was like, holy cow. So then I started getting phone calls from golfers, helping them, and I gave a talk for the section of the PGA. And just in talking to golfers and teaching them what I was learning, very quickly they started performing a lot better. And then I remember in 2002, it was very early. I was just out of graduate school. I got a call from Jack Nicklaus, who hadn't made a cut in 2 years on the PGA Tour. He flew me up to Ohio to the Memorial Tournament, and I stayed with him at his house, which was surreal, as you can imagine, like sitting at the breakfast table next to Jack while Barbara Nicholas is making us omelets. And Barbara's like, Gio, would you like cheese on your omelet? I'm like, what? Like, is this really happening? I'm like, this is Jack. You're Barbara. There's Gary. Why am I here? And it's weird because then that week, Jack made the cut at the Memorial. He hadn't made a cut in 2 years. And when they asked me, I said, Jack, where did this come from? He said, well, there's a young man who's staying with me this week who's reminding me how I used to play golf. And so it's one of those things where I was just geeking out on psychology, writing these thought pieces really for my own edification. And they got out into the world. And then before you know it, once Jack Nicklaus, I think if I remember correctly, what he said was, I was the only, because for years he didn't like sports psychology. He said, this is the only sports psychologist I ever met who's worth a damn, was the quote, which I guess is a rousing endorsement. And then after that, Jack Nicklaus gives you some version of an endorsement and the phone starts ringing.
Wow. That's an incredible story. And if for those of our listeners who haven't read what you've talked about in terms of the intrinsic, extrinsic motivations and as you put it, mastery, that kind of quest for mastery, could you maybe give us a sort of broad sort of overview or outline of some of those lessons that you're imparting on those pros during your early years?
Yeah, for sure. I'll tell you a quick story, Justin Rose story. So Justin Rose, and it'll address the mastery versus ego. So when Justin Rose called me, 2011 or 12, I guess it was, he had never won on the PGA Tour. He'd been out there for 9 years, 0 wins. And I'd helped some friends of his, I guess. And he called me. I was on a family vacation. He said, hey, can you help me? I said, I don't know. I said, I never know if I can help someone. I said, but, and he lived in Orlando at the time and I lived in Winter Park. So we were close to each other. I said, I'll be back next week. I said, let me ask you a question. I said, why do you play golf? And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, why do you play golf? I said, you've been playing since you were a kid. You get up every day, you travel all over the world, you pack your suitcases, unpack, clean your clubs. Like, you do this thing every day of your life. Have you ever stopped to ask yourself why? And I'll never forget, he starts laughing. He goes, it never occurred to me. I said, why don't you think about it? And then when I get back in town in Winter Park, let's explore that question. And what's interesting about the why question is, in psychology, we do massive studies with huge data sets of people, asking people, why do you, and it could be, why are you a doctor? Why are you a school teacher? Why are you a professional golfer? Why have you chosen this particular thing that you do? And what you come to realize, theater, actor, artist, writer, and people bifurcate into 2 camps generally. I mean, there's a lot of answers, but you're doing something. The why is either the mastery reason is love of the craft itself. Like for golf, it's I love to play the game. I love to refine my game. I love to learn about it. When I play badly, I react with curiosity and more motivation. And so those are the drivers of what's called a mastery orientation. And in it's called an ego orientation. The why is driven by what I can get from golf, right? Ego golfers are driven by results. They're driven by golf gives me status. It gives me money. It makes me, if I'm in college, it makes me a big deal. It's what golf can give you. So it's not really about golf. It's not about the task. It's about what the task can give you. And what you come to realize, and this is true in running, if you've ever read a book called Born to Run, people who run for the love of running, if you look at the history of the world records in marathoning, once money entered running, like times went down. They didn't get better. They got worse. And so when people are driven by, call it rewards or extrinsic motivators, it compromises performance at the highest level. And you think about what Ben Hogan one time said. He said, golf is the livelihood in doing the thing that I love to do. I don't like the glamour. I just like the game. And that separation between glamour and the game is what made Hogan great. It's what makes Tiger great. It's what made Nicklaus great. It's what, if you look at the profile of all the great ones in every domain, this is true in basketball as well, the purity of the relationship with the craft itself is what leads to excellence. I'll give an example. I've worked with a guy named Steve Cohen for the last 5 years. Steve Cohen's he's a billionaire hedge fund investor. And people would think, well, why would he get up every day and trade the stock market? Is he greedy? No, he just loves the process of grappling with the market. And because he loves it, he's good at it. Because he's good at it, he makes a lot of money. But he doesn't do it for the money. You do it for the art, for the craft, for the engagement. It's why Tiger plays golf still. It's not for the money. It's probably why Steph Curry plays basketball. If you listen to how he talks about it, it's why Bodie Miller skis. It's why Kelly Slater surfs. It's their oxygen. It's what they need to do. And when you pursue golf for the right reasons, and I'm not saying that rewards are bad. You can be mastery and ego. But if you are more ego than mastery, you'll never achieve your highest goals.
It was interesting in your book. You mentioned that Hogan was, and I'm going to paraphrase here, but this could be wrong. But was saying that tournaments themselves are anticlimactic, and all the work to get there—that's the satisfying thing. And it's absolutely right, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And it's we don't live in an Ayn Rand novel. There are practical realities of life, like you got to pay the bills and it costs. I understand that. So, but the one thing about golf is very sensitive to people who don't play it for the right reasons. When your why gets off, and there's so much evidence for this. Because what happens? Think of it this way: if your goal in golf is to impress somebody, like it's not about golf, it's not about playing the game, it's about making an impression on a person. Okay, so let's say you go out in the first hole and you play badly, you make a double bogey or a triple bogey. What emotion are you likely to feel if your goal is to impress someone and you make a triple bogey? What's your emotion going to be?
Pretty pissed off.
I feel pretty shitty.
Embarrassed as well, yeah.
Embarrassed,
embarrassed,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Embarrassed and angry. So let's talk about anger and embarrassment, which on our profile are two of the bad reactions, embarrassment being the worst. So when you feel embarrassed, there's a part of your brain called the amygdala. And when you think of the amygdala, it's a psychological throw switch. It's like a fire alarm that if you pull it, it's going to shut down. If you pull a fire alarm in a building, it shuts down the electricity. It shuts down the building. Everything shuts down. That's how embarrassment is in the brain. If you're embarrassed to talk to a pretty girl, like you can't even articulate words. If you're embarrassed to speak in front of a crowd, any time embarrassed enters itself into the brain, you cannot do a simple task. And golf is the same way. There's no such thing as a golf swing good enough that a golfer can execute it regularly with the fear of embarrassment. So ego golf, right, the why, leads to the reaction of embarrassment, which leads to the amygdala firing, which creates a physiological arousal, which kills your golf swing. And so you realize the way the dominoes fall, that the why sets off a series of events that you're either going to be a fearless golfer or you're going to play tentative golf with a lot of self-doubt because you're afraid of what people are going to think of you. So going back to the Justin Rose story, and really hundreds of golfers that I've worked with, once we get our why lined up, results happen pretty quickly. Justin Rose won, so 9 years with no wins. He won 21 days after the first time we met, and then he won 10 days after that again. Once we got his why lined up, and that's happened 50 times. 50 professional wins for the golfers I've worked with, and a lot of it begins with getting that why lined up in the mastery golf.
And is there a tip or some kind of practical method you could maybe give our listeners in terms of how they can go about discovering their why? Do you think sort of journaling or just trying to write themselves a kind of essay of sorts to try and figure out why they play the game, something as simple as that, can actually lead you down that path of self-discovery that will allow you to align these things better?
Yeah, and I write about that in both Fearless Golf and Golf Flow. But it's different for everybody. But so long as all you have to do is really understand the difference, right, of mastery versus ego. But the thing about it, over the years, hundreds of golfers have emailed, literally hundreds, and said, "Oh my God, I feel like I'm reading. You wrote this about me. Like that's me." Like, well, of course, that's everybody. Like, there's a process that happens that drives people into ego golf. But undoing it is pretty easy. You just got to understand that it exists. So
it truly was an eye opener reading Fearless Golf. I'm gonna read a tiny quote if you'd allow me, because it really did. I read this and I realized immediately that it was me. It was me. And it was. I mean, I'm undoubtedly an ego golfer. Like, I'm obsessed with handicap. I want it to be low. I want to go in somewhere and tell them I'm play of 6 or 5 or 4. It doesn't really matter. I just want it to be low. And there was a line in your book that said, when you require the approval of others, you give them the key to your emotions and forfeit the amount of control you have over yourself and your confidence. And I read that, and I was sitting out here with my wife, and I read it, and I said, this guy just explained my life in one word. And I just heard, and she was like, you do, every time you cook, you ask me how it tastes. Can you just put it down in front of me and just accept that you can cook? I mean, it's as simple as sitting down and just thinking about it. What do I want? And for me, it was, unfortunately, wanted to appear good.
Yeah. Yeah, I got to tell you that the old saying about, when you live your life seeking the approval of others, like that's a killer to happiness. Because think of like Hollywood people in Hollywood who start to believe their own press, right? And all of a sudden you're attaching your well-being to the opinion of other people. So you have these people who are rich and they're famous and they're beautiful people, and they're largely depressed, oftentimes suicidal, and abusing a lot of drugs. And you wonder, how can somebody have beauty, fame, wealth, and be miserable and depressed? Well, because they exchanged their love of performing for the need of approval. And then when you do that, you're a prisoner. And then all of a sudden a critic says something bad about you, and all of a sudden you're miserable. I won't tell you the name of the golfer. I'll tell you, there's a golfer who I was talking for our first conversation, and I said, hey, listen, you've won this many majors, and this is the profile of your life. Scale of 1 to 10, how happy are you? And he said, I would say a 6. I said, a 6? If you're a 6, then what am I supposed to be? Like, what are the rest of us supposed to be? You're a decorated major champion. You've got this life. Like, if you're a 6, there's no hope for anybody else. But you realize when people need the approval and the idolatry of other people, like, and that's a hell from which nobody can escape. So you got to everyone really has to manage the degree to which they're willing to let their happiness be determined by what other people think of them. And it's especially true in golf.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to what you were talking about earlier in terms of flow states as well, doesn't it? I guess if you're doing something because of a true love or true passion for that exercise, you're likely to fall into that flow state. I know Carol Dweck, she's also talked about sort of the fixed mindset versus the growth mindset. And it seems like in recent years, golf psychology has moved away from how it began initially. And it speaks to, Jack Nicklaus's early skepticism of it as people sort of telling stories about what the best golfers did, to now kind of being able to tie maybe the mechanical and physiological manifestations of these thought processes. And it seems like the work you do is kind of at that interface of, the theoretical side of things, but also how that's expressed by the body.
Yeah, I think that's, because in the early days, if you're doing a straight psychological play, like sometimes you could be thinking about pizza and play good golf. Like, how's that? Like, if psychology matters, why is it that I can think about pizza and play golf? Why can I think about, why can Matt Kuchar mentally check out on a golf course, not remember any of his shots, and shoot 64? And the reason is because the way the dominoes fall goes, psychology, it's your thoughts. And then the physiology changes, right? So if I have a fear-inducing thought, my body creates epinephrine and norepinephrine and cortisol, all these stress hormones. So I have a physiological shift. Well, then those stress hormones bathe my muscles. So my muscles tighten, my capillaries constrict, and I grip the club tighter. Well, all of a sudden it went from psychological to physiological to musculature, where I'm gripping the club tighter, and then I can't set the club properly and I can't release properly, right? I hold it off, which is why the choker's miss is always what?
It's always a block right, or typically a block right for a right-hander, yeah.
Yeah, it's that big block right? That big ballooning block. And again, the psychology changes the physiology, typically shows up in tense muscles and tight grip pressure. So all of a sudden, with the tight muscles and the tight grip pressure, I can't really set the club properly. I'm into my downswing, so now I'm stuck. And at impact, I'm too tight to release. So it's that big balloon block. So you see the psychological affects the physiological, which affects the mechanical. And now you've hit a bad shot and you feel embarrassed, going back to ego. which makes all those stress hormones spike even more. So now on the next tee, you're tighter
It's a
and
vicious
more
cycle.
afraid. And then you're in the downward spiral. That's right.
It's almost like a domino effect. It's crazy. Isn't it?
It's a cycle. It feeds on itself. It's like
Yeah.
a nuclear reaction. Yeah, it feeds on its own energy.
So you need to get in your happy place, basically.
That's part of it. That's right.
Yeah. Whether that be pizza or something else.
That's right. That's right.
Well, we had Tom Coyne on the podcast a few weeks back, and he obviously we talked about Paper Tiger and his when he tried to do everything to get on tour, and he got a psychologist, and he talked about his psychologist was Dr. Bob Winters, and he talked about, and I thought this was fantastic, that to have a mechanism of just having an elastic band around your wrist, and every time you think about something that's not on point for that golf on that day, you just snap this band and it kicks you back into, okay, what am I doing? Think about target, think about the course, think about my golf, and not think about the bad things that can get destructive in the head. Is that a good sort of mechanism to, or that sort of philosophy, a good mechanism to keep you on track?
I don't know. I've never studied that method. I will say that anything that you can do that'll snap you back into the present moment is probably a good idea. And if that's the rationale behind that, it's a good thing. I remember Jackie Burke. Somebody told me a story of Jackie Burke used to tell people, if you play bad, something about you should wrap yourself in the knuckles so that your brain associates bad golf with pain, and then you'll be afraid to play bad golf. It was like, wow. I think modern psychology has probably dispelled that, but there's a lot of ideas, and they work for some people. But anything that gets you in the present moment is a good idea.
Yeah, on that point, do you think with younger golfers coming through now, I mean, it seems to me, the foundation stone of your teaching is really, getting your kind of priorities and your motivations really in check and understanding why it is you play this game. I think for a lot of young golfers now, that mindfulness that you need to really understand your own mind is kind of, I want to say, almost hindered by social media and these, this kind of, I don't know, fast paced but quick dopamine release sort of living that we kind of thrive off, whether it's, social media posts, trying to get likes, trying to get comments and approval from others. It's kind of in direct sort of opposition to the need to really understand why you play the game.
Yeah. So, the why matters. What's interesting in the social media age and for young golfers, I think it was chapter 3 of Fearless Golf, we talked about what's called self-efficacy, which is essentially confidence, right? And so confidence really matters in golf. And in fact, Jack Nicklaus recently, out of his, I think it was his Instagram account or whatever he's using these days, which is pretty hilarious that Jack Nicklaus is on social media. But it's a picture of a young Jack. It says, confidence is the most important single factor in this game. Confidence is the most important single factor in this game. And then he captioned it, it's the most important single factor in golf and in many ways, life, right? So we talk about confidence. Now, here's what's interesting about the social media age and the interaction of confidence. So there are 4 types of experiences that affect a person's confidence, right? There's 4 experiences. Anyone want to take a guess what they are? Or guess what one of them is? Like what makes you feel confident?
Praise.
Approval.
Right, number 1. Yep, so certainly praise. What else?
Some kind of tangible or measurable success. That I guess you'd be able to evaluate for, on your own record, really.
Yeah, you got 2 out of 4.
Good. We're not doing slathering ourselves in glory here.
Okay, I'll fill in the blanks. Ready? So, yeah, you guys did great. 2 out of 4. So the way confidence works is there's 4 types of experience. The first and most important thing is this tangible success and failure, right? It's like if I have success, if I do something well, if I jump in a pool and I swim across it, I have confidence that the next time I jump in a pool, I'll be able to swim across it. If I pick up a 7-iron and I swing the club and the ball goes near the hole and it keeps happening, I have confidence that the next time I pick up a 7-iron, that's going to happen. Well, the second type of experience, and the same with failure. If I keep trying something and it doesn't work out, so that's the powerful driver. The next one are what are called verbal and social persuasions. It's what people say to us, right? And people praise you and they keep giving you feedback that you're good. You elevate your confidence. And if people continue to critique and criticize you, it lowers it, right? And therein lies the danger, right, of praise and so forth and ego. The third one is what's called vicarious experiences, meaning, I'll give an example that happens in schools. Let's say we're all in class together, the four of us, and we sit down and you guys say, hey, Dr. Gio, did you study for the test? And I said, what test? Like, oh my God, we have a big exam today. It's a huge exam. I said, oh, I didn't even know about it. And you're like, well, we've been studying for weeks. And I'm like, oh, great. And we all take the exam. And I get 100% on the exam. And I didn't even study. Well, this is a bad example. It should be the opposite. You guys get 100% on the exam. And you didn't study. And I studied my fanny off and I stink at it. And I think, boy, I studied really, really hard and I failed. And they rolled out of bed and they did well. Well, what does that do to my confidence? It lowers it, right? In other words, we compare ourselves to other people. And this happens on the PGA Tour all the time. So, a rookie goes out on the PGA Tour. He may have been the best golfer in college. He may have won the Hogan Award, for the best college golfer. He may have been the best golfer on a developmental tour. You get on the PGA Tour, and you're on the driving range. And all of a sudden, you're next to Justin Rose, and you're like, oh man, I can't hit a drive like that. And then behind you is Patrick Reed, and you're like, I don't hit my irons like that. And on the putting green, you're next to Jordan Speith. You're like, I can't putt like that. And all of a sudden, you showed up because your game is good enough, but you start comparing with other people. You're never going to drive the ball like Justin Rose, or in the olden days, like Lee Trevino. You're never going to putt it like Jordan Speith. You're not like, so these vicarious experiences can undermine confidence. I was talking to an old client of mine who was an actor out in Hollywood, and he said, you get out there and like everyone looks like Harrison Ford and everyone looks like, and so even though he was handsome from his small town in Indiana, you get out there and everyone looks like Brad Pitt. You're like, I'm ugly, right? So it's this comparative information. And then the fourth type of experience are what are called physiological experiences, meaning the butterflies in the stomach, right? And when you get those butterflies, some people get those butterflies and they experience it as, hey, I'm psyched up. That means I'm excited for today. And other people get those butterflies and they're like, oh no, like, oh, I feel sick to my stomach. And now physiologically, the same thing is happening, but it's how you interpret those feelings. So we know the drivers of confidence, right? It's results plus verbal and social, what people tell you, plus how you compare yourself with other people, plus how you interpret your physiological states. And the big problem is in the media-driven world, as we talked about with Ego Golf, is people are so brutal and so critical and so mean that anybody who's willing to actually buy into that, it's what you said, you read out of my book earlier, Tom. It's like you're essentially turning your confidence over to other people who have no vested interest in your well-being. So your confidence rises and falls with the flippant remarks of other people. So as a general rule of thumb, and I know a lot of my players do it, they're off social media. They pop in once a week, but other than that, get the hell off it, because it is not going to do anything to help you in the game of golf.
On the same note, would you tell them to sort of avoid newspapers or magazines as well, or after a big tournament, or I don't know if they've missed the cut or whatever else?
It depends. It depends on where they're at. It's interesting because we talk about attachments, psychological attachments, and when the pivot point is, so golfers been having a lot of success, and so they're getting a lot of positive press. Jordan Speith is probably a really good modern example of this, right? Tons of press, tons of praise, tons of love from the media. All of a sudden, he goes through a little bit of a downturn, which is natural in the development of a golfer. And all of a sudden, the same people who were praising him and elevating him and just heaping love on him, all of a sudden are critical and critiquing and saying, here's what's wrong. Brandon Chambly, I could fix Jordan Spieth in 1 minute. Like, what? No, like you never taught anybody anything. Like, what are you talking about? Who have you ever coached? It's crazy. But like Jordan Spieth has to hear things like that. So therein lies the point, is you get attached to the praise, which means during the criticism, your brain already has an attachment, right? And And that's the difficult point, is the attachment to the praise. That happened to David Duval. It happened to Vijay Singh. You know, I remember when I worked with Vijay was having a terrible time putting. And, you know, there was a period of time where Vijay Singh was one of the best putters in the world. And we traced back how it happened. In a press conference once, someone in the media said to him, "Hey, Vijay, why are you such a bad putter?" They didn't ask him, "Are you a bad putter?" They asked, "Why are you such a bad putter?" And so he's like, I wonder why. Here's why. He starts explaining why he's a bad putter. So he literally got talked into the fact that he's a bad putter. It happened to Sergio Garcia.
Yeah.
Like, they get talked into things. And as soon as, maybe you guys will remember this moment. So once I explained the process to Vijay, he walked out of his hotel to the course, and someone from the Golf Channel came up to him and said, "Hey, Vijay, can I get a minute with you?" And he said, "Sure, as long as you address me as the best putter in the world." And the person said, "Excuse me?" And Vijay said, "I want you to ask me a question, and I want you to begin it with, Vijay, the best putter in the world, I have a question for you." And if you know Vijay, like, he really did this. Like, I watched, I was like, whoa, because he was so mad that he let them talk him into the fact that he was a bad putter. He was like, and guess what? He won the tournament 2 weeks later,
Come
and he
on.
putted great. Like,
That's
so
brilliant.
psychology really matters in this game.
I take it, was that all in the build up to when he won? He won something like 10 times in a year, didn't he? In 2004 or 5, something like that.
Yeah, this was in advance of that epic run where he won 8 times. Yeah. So Vijay doesn't get enough love in the golf world for really truly how exceptional he was and is as a golfer.
Gio, you've talked at some length about how, you know, we hear the word process a lot in modern sort of golf instruction and in general, not even just golf psychology. And it's almost been used to the point where it's kind of lost any kind of meaning or relevance. And I think, as you put it, you know, drug addicts have a process. They have a kind of habitual or repetitive nature to their habits. And, you know, just because someone's thinking about the process doesn't necessarily mean that process is optimal or even functional. So could you maybe speak a bit about how some of your different players have tried to, you know, change their processes or how people can really dial in on a process that is beneficial to them?
100%. Yeah, I'm really glad you're asking this question. It's a real misunderstanding in the world of golf. Teachers, psychologists, coaches, everyone's telling young players, have a process. And when people call me, you know, coaches will call me and say, "Oh, my player, you know, I think what he really needs to do, I see his process change." And nobody understands, you know, how process was born. Like, why did it come into the jargon and into the collective consciousness of golfers anyway? And there are reasons, right? And so a process for the sake of a process is not beneficial. As you mentioned, like, drug addicts have a process, alcoholics have a process. They wake up, they drink, they pass out, they wake up, they drink, that's a process. And it's, bad marriages have a process, right? You know, one of the things we know about couples therapy, it's really interesting. Couples will go into a therapy session and they'll be in the car on the way home and things will be great. And the wife will say, "Boy, you know, I'm really glad, you know, you finally took my advice and, you know, came to therapy." The husband will say, "Well, it wasn't your idea, it was my idea." And say, "No, it wasn't." And all of a sudden they're fighting again. Like you're fighting about, you know, like, it's this, and you know, the couples will tell you, we can't stop. We don't try. But that's a process, right? So what you realize is all dysfunctional dynamics are nothing but processes. So process all by itself fixes nothing. In golf, the main reason there are really 3 main reasons to have processes. Number 1 is, you know, almost for the reason that pilots have what's called a pre-flight checklist. You do not want to rely on memory, and have your career and your well-being rely on memory. That's unreliable. So you want to be able to do the same thing, sort of routine, time and again, repeat something. Number 2, especially in golf, if you understand the nature of the game of golf, golf attacks 2 things. It attacks tempo and tension. So the way the brain works, in what we call environmental priming, is, think about what happens in a Vegas casino. So what Las Vegas knows is that if they can control the environment around you, they can shape your behavior, right? So if they get rid of the clocks, there's no clocks on the wall, so you never know what time it is. There's no windows, and you change the money for chips. Like all of a sudden, people are going to spend a lot more money, like so because they shape the environment. Well, same things happens to golfers, right? So the environment around a golfer, we call the variability. As score changes, our feelings change. Who we're paired with, our feelings change. Like being paired with Tiger feels different than being paired with Sean O'Hare, than being paired with Matt Kuchar, right? How your playing partner is playing changes. So like all the things that change around a golfer changes our psychology. So what a good routine does is it protects tempo and tension, right? So if you look at what Tiger Woods says about his routine, he doesn't talk about doing the same thing. He talks about doing the same thing in the same rhythm. When Tiger's warming up on the range before a tournament, he's not working on his golf swing. He's working on his tempo and rhythm. Everything is about rhythm. So the purpose of a good routine is not about doing the same things in the same order. So doing the same things in the same order at the same cadence. Now, the reason why is it protects you from the variability, the shifting, the things that change in golf. And the things that change a golfer's psychology are the golfer's score, who they're paired with, who's watching, how they're playing, and oh, by the way, the prestige of the tournament. You know, when golfers show up at Augusta National for the first time, all of a sudden they're overwhelmed because it's it's like, oh my God, this is the Masters. And what I try to tell them is no, you're not playing the Masters, you're playing Augusta National. It's just a golf course. And then I take them into the front door of the clubhouse, where if you walk in the front door and you take an immediate right and then your next right, there's a restroom there, and you can see the plumbing because it's an old building, and say that plumbing is the same plumbing as the Waffle House down the street. Like don't make this bigger than it is. You want to suppress it. It's just a golf course, and your 7-iron still flies 160 yards, and your everything is the same. You don't want to get overwhelmed by the moment. But again, routine protects people from something bigger than their psychology can absorb.
Yeah, that's a brilliant point, actually. I know I follow some of Scott Fawcett's work. I'm not sure if you've seen some of the stuff he's put out about
really good,
timing Tiger Woods' routine over the years, and just seeing how at like the 2000 US Open, for instance, he was like 13.5 seconds or 13.7 seconds almost without fail on sort of walking in to the ball to impact pretty much every time. And it got me thinking, when you talk about developing a routine that protects, tempo and tension, would you sort of encourage players to almost have a clock in their head of how long they're kind of taking, or how many looks at the target they're taking? Should they kind of develop that? So
it's interesting.
Or...
Well, you don't want golfers to be rigid. Like that's the problem. The way the routine is often taught is it makes golfers rigid. I've heard, the terms that golfers say, I feel like I'm being put in a psychological straitjacket. Everyone has their natural rhythm. Nick Price has a fast cadence. Charles Hall III has a naturally fast cadence. Brooks Koepka has his cadence. Dustin Johnson has his. Zach Johnson on the slower end. Jonathan Bird on the slower end. Bryson DeChambeau on the slower end, but like everyone's got their own internal rhythm, and that's really what you're trying to sync up to. So I don't know that I think it's good for a coach to time a golfer and then try to get within a range, almost like blood pressure. There's no perfect blood pressure. There's a range of good. It's all the same within the range, and the best golfers I know, they live within the range. And in their best flow states, it tends to be like Scott Force said about Tiger, it tends to aggregate like on a number, but it's not rigid. There's a rhythm to it, right? There's a rhythm and a timing and a tempo to it.
And I guess in a way, it's almost more of a symptom rather than the cause of. It's a symptom of thinking the right way and thinking correctly, rather than they've not got consistent timing of routines because they're thinking about the consistent timing. It's just because mentally they're uncluttered and they're free of tension. That's
exactly right, Bruce. It's an expression of a good internal state. When your internal state is in your house is in order, your psychology is good, you've practiced your tempo, you just fall in. And I did a study on this, part of the study for the second book, and I remember asking Adam Scott. I said, talk to me, how many times in a round of golf do you fall into flow? Call in, if we want to define flow, it's just that state of really great rhythm and flow, and your tempo is great. And he's the only one of all the golfers I answered who gave this answer. He said, about once a round. I'm like, really? It's like, yeah, every round of golf, I fall into flow for at least a few holes. I was like, that's amazing. No wonder you're Adam Scott. Some golfers fall into it once a month. Arnold Palmer told me, I said, how long does it last? He said, for me, it lasted for about 20 years.
Wow.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Just returning to something you kind of touched upon earlier, you talked about, I guess it really goes back to the heart of the mastery versus ego dichotomy, and how the exceptional people really at the tail ends of these distributions, whether it's someone like, Steve Cohen in the finance world or Tiger in golf, they don't really have such a thing as a work-life balance. They're all in and they're fully invested in their craft. I just wondered how do you sometimes balance that, obsession and doing things for the real love of the game or the activity with, taking the time to maybe kind of chill out and have a bit of a reset and maybe rest? Is that something that you see as being necessary, or do you think that actually if you love it enough, you won't really need to take time off?
I think this is where there's a lot of individuality. Like we can study and we can sort of, infer from the best in the world at all crafts. But it's really individual. I believe, I think it was Monet, but I also know this is true of Picasso and Van Gogh, that they would paint for 24 straight hours. Like go into a room and for 24 hours, paint, and then come out, not know they were in there for 24 hours, and then you sleep for a day. And so there's that. And I think it was the Michelangelo when he painted the Sistine Chapel. Like if you look at his sleep schedule, like the dynamic between work and rest. Steve Cohen, takes a vacation a year. Like he works 6 days a week. Out of 10,000 trading days, he took 4 off over the course of 20 over the course of 40 years. If I remember correctly, I did the math. He took off 4 tradable days, and that's because he was in the hospital. So he doesn't take days off. And then every Sunday he does calls, but Saturdays is his day off. And when he's Saturday, either hits golf balls or goes to an art museum. So that's his rest. That's his mental reset. But like for the people that I've studied, and I think the literature suggests this, is that it's easier to work than to not work. Because if you care so much about something, I think it was Hogan who said, I take a day off and I notice, a day off from practice, and I take 2 days off from practice and my wife notices. And if I take 3 days off from practice, the world notices, right? And so it just, for every day off that you take, you got to spend 3 days getting back to where you were. When you're talking about skill development. But with that said, there is a dynamic in the flow literature about what we call deep immersion, where you are all in, or total immersion, and then correspondingly deep rest. And so the way Tiger talks about it is he would do a run of tournaments when his body was healthy, go all in, like literally. And at the end, he would be so exhausted, say, I'm not touching a club. And so what he would do is he would wait until he wanted to touch a club. Then he would wait one more day, right? Because that motivation matters. Desire matters in exceptional performances. And so there's that old William James quote that, we learn to ski in the summer and to swim in the winter. The idea being when you're away from something, it's still marinating in the back of your mind. So then when you show up, you're like, oh, there it is. So, learning is a very convoluted process. It's not linear. We get better at things sometimes when we're not doing them. The development of skill, and getting away from a task, what we call psychological aperture. Sometimes you get too close to the game and then you're reacting to every little thing. So the thing is to get away from the game. Sometimes you get too far away from the game and you get lazy. I remember Justin Leonard called me in 2004 and he was mired in a slump. And maybe 2003 he called me, I forget, or 4. And he'd been missed a bunch of cuts in a row. And I said, all right, well, what are you planning to do this week? He said, I'm teeing it up. I said, didn't I read somewhere that you have a house, a ski resort in the mountains somewhere? He said, yeah, in Colorado. I said, if I were you, here's what I would do. I would go to Dallas, where you live, with your golf clubs, put them in the garage, leave them there, and then fly to Colorado. I said, and then call me in 2 weeks. He's like, but I have to play this week. Like I'm outside the money list. I'm gonna lose. I said, I said, well, you can show up and keep trying to play with 50% of your game because you're mentally fried, or come back in 2 weeks with 100% of your game. Yeah, you'll have fewer tournaments, but would you rather play 10 tournaments with 40% of your game, or 6 tournaments with 80% of your game? So he went, took 2 weeks off, came back, and I think he won 2 weeks later. So this idea of the dynamic between deep rest and total immersion in a craft, you just have to know where your psychological aperture is when you're too close to the game and get away from it, or when you're too far from the game and when you have to just like really just go all in.
And I guess that's the role of a team in the modern game, you know, with some of the best players in the world, amateurs and pros alike. That's the real value of the team, is having someone who, you know, that they trust, or several people who they trust, who are able to maybe objectively evaluate whether they're too far away or too close, and say one of two things to them.
That's right. That's right. And then, you know, knowing who to listen to, and yeah, a good team makes all the difference.
In terms of a sort of day to day, or a day in the life with your sort of players, clients, how often are you traveling on tour with them? Is it a case of they ring you, or
well,
how does it work?
In my younger years, before I had 3 kids, I was out there about 40 weeks a year.
Okay.
And nowadays I'm out there maybe 5 or 6 weeks. It's less and less. You know, the guys I've worked with for a long time, they know the playbook. They call me when they need what we call a behavioral nudge or a lesson, or I'll fly to their house, or they'll fly here. But, you know, at this point, I don't need to be on the road very much. It's mostly over the phone and Skype, and do it at my local golf course here at Interlaken Country Club.
How do you think the landscape of golf psychology is changing? You know, it kind of ties in nicely with that in the sort of modern age, and just I guess just seeing the steps that increasing number of tour pros are prepared to go to. Obviously, you know, Bryson DeChambeau goes about it in his own way, and there are technologies out there like the focus band, and I mean, anyone who follows Justin Rose on Instagram sees that he's such a dedicated sort of student of the game, hitting balls in his simulator, or using force plates. Do you think any of those technologies are maybe moving the needle on golf psychology at all?
I do. You know, it's interesting because psychology was born out of philosophy. You know, psychology as a discipline is not that old, but psychology has become more scientific, more empirical. So they're better assessments. I think golfers are getting into it earlier. You know, I always used to say, it's easier for me to train good habits than to undo bad habits. So, you know, by the time a golfer comes to me in their 20s or 30s, sometimes they have so many bad mental habits. But more and more, we're getting a lot of junior golfers taking these fearless golf academies, getting their mental toolbox where it needs to be. So the fact that we're getting them in earlier, they're getting better training. So the habits then they go rep out over the course of years. So by the time they get to college, developmental tours, professional tours, they're in pretty good shape. You know, Chris Como, who I'm a huge fan of. Chris is a lovely guy, but a hell of a student of the game. What a mind! I would argue, you know, Butch Harmon is the best teacher in my lifetime. I think it's hard to argue that. But in terms of modern day, next generation teachers, Chris Como is as good as I've ever seen. Really, truly. And he hosts a program at the PGA show every year for all the teachers, and it's grown exponentially every year for the last 5 years. But you know, he is so deeply immersed in technology and innovation, and he's got a wide open mind. And to see how all the technologies are converging in golf. Now, what's got to happen is you got to make sure a golfer doesn't get overwhelmed with information, you know, paralysis through overanalysis. But if you're able to apply the right type of technology the right way to a golfer, there's no reason why these technologies, both psychological, physiological, mechanical, measurement, movement, biomechanical, biofeedback, can't help make golfers better quickly.
But you've talked about some of the teaching you do, Gio. I know you've got the Fearless Golf Academy launching next week. What can you tell us about the Fearless Golf Academy?
Yeah, we're launching it next week. You know, so when I work with a golfer, you know, the process we use that, you know, we've developed over the course of 15 years is every golfer that wants to work with me, they always have to come first spend a day with me. And that's not because I'm stubborn. It's because, sometimes people want to just call me and they want me to give them some psychology and get a quick fix. And I've learned over the years it's not effective. Now, what is effective is if you come spend a day with myself and Ina Shad, who is my understudy, and Ina Kim Shad, who won the U.S. Women's Mid-Am this year. She's the reigning U.S. Women's Mid-Am champion, and she's studying under me. So we're running these virtual Fearless Golf Academies. So it used to be you have to come spend the day with me, and then after that I can coach you over the phone and help you out. But that initial Fearless Golf Academy, we do the right assessment, we give you your own personal playbook, and we know what to work on. But I haven't always been able to be here and see people, and people can't always fly to see me. Our schedules haven't linked up. So Ina, in her brilliance, has developed a virtual Fearless Golf Academy where we get to do the whole process over Skype or Zoom or FaceTime. And we've piloted it with about 5 golfers, and it's working really, really well. So now I get to work with people all over the world without them having to fly to Winter Park to come see me.
Well, that's a silver lining of being a lockdown, isn't it? That you can come out with these new innovative techniques to get help to more golfers.
Well, it's funny. We developed it even before the lockdown. This wasn't in response to the lockdown. It's in response to the fact that a lot of people need help, and not everybody can fly to Florida to get it. So we piloted it. Ina designed it. We followed the exact same protocol we do when people come and see me. And the only thing we're tweaking is the on-course experience. But we've adjusted for it, and it's working really well.
If someone was interested in that, how do they go about going for it?
Just go to the website, www.fearlessgolf.com, and you fill out the contact sheet. And, we've got, over the years, there's been about a year to year and a half wait list, for me to get to work with people. And again, a lot of it has to do with my schedule, their schedule, and linking things up. But, I think that wait list is shrinking now because, if I've got a half a day, we can get you in. So yeah, we're excited about the next couple of months.
Well, Gio, honestly, thank you so much for giving us some of your time this evening. It's been truly fascinating, and you might have 3 more guys knocking on your door asking for psychological help by the end of this. But thank you so much for giving up your time and coming on the podcast with us.
Thank you, Gio.
Thank you, guys.
Really
this was
appreciate
awesome. That. You guys are terrific. I'll do it anytime you want.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Gio. I wish you all the best, and
good luck with the academy. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Have a great day.
Enjoy the golf tomorrow.
Thank you.
Watch this.